How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Alloved's guide series on Curse of Strahd, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we'll be diving into the Werewolf Den. Obviously, some bad stuff's going down here. Before we get into anything major though, players, do not watch this. DMs that want added insight on how we can run this thing, go ahead and stick around because there is a lot to go over. And here we are, as always, James RPG art, fantastic stuff. Look at it, it looks beautiful. That sells it. Your players go up this cold hill and then they discover the mouth of literally a wolf and they know that there's something on inside. And presumably they can hear some howls inside. So the real question is, of course, we have this location and we have it right here on the map. But how do we get our players to actually come here, and what incentive would they possibly have? Well, for starters, let's look at the general surrounding area here. It is close to Krezk, and it is close to Van Richten's tower. So those come up in the other areas, right? We have this idea that at Van Richten's tower, your players could theoretically get attacked by some werewolves that come from that location. We also have some information that at Krezk, the people have locked themselves up away for numerous reasons. Of course, one of them being the fact that they can hear howls preying on the night. And that is presumably the werewolves stalking around trying to find some kids. So at some point, it may be mentioned that there are werewolves in this land. Whether that's because your players bump into the werewolves as a random encounter, or they go and fight them in one of these scripted encounters. You know, they can find these werewolves all over the place. But the real question is, why would the players want to come here, and how do we get them there? Well, the why is pretty simple. It's because they are evil. They are doing incredibly bad things. They are killing people, eating them, but even more depraved is the fact that they are taking kids, making them fight to the death, and turning whichever one survives into a werewolf. Pretty gnarly stuff. Your players aren't going to know this information per se unless they've gone to Castle Ravenloft or they've interrogated one of the werewolves that's around here. That could provide some really great insight onto what's going on here. But I think there's a bit more of a shock value if your players show up here and find out all the crazy stuff that's going on. So of course the first way to get our players here is to have that encounter with a werewolf, where your players fight a werewolf and they probably subdue the person, and the werewolf spills the beans and says, yeah, we have a cave up there, and yeah, that's where our home base is, and that's where all the werewolves are. And if your players are adventurous enough, they're going to go out and kill them all. But that's kind of the easy one. Let's take a look at some other ways we can get our players to go over there. Another perfect example being Esmeralda. Esmeralda wants to believe in the party. She wants to see these people in action, and she wants to see if they're good enough to team alongside with and fight Strahd in the grand finale. So, to that degree, Esmeralda may say, hey, I know for a fact that there's some werewolves out there. How about you and me go out there and kill them, and we'll see what you're made of. And that's a great way to rid the world of some evil and prove yourselves to an awesome hunter. Another way you can get your players coming here is by leaving a literal breadcrumb trail. Your players could get told, hey, we had a caravan that left insert location, Wizard of Wines, Krezk, Vallaki, etc., etc. You could have it where the caravan that left was attacked. When your players arrive to the location of the caravan, they can see that there was a bit of damage, some people dead, and a bloody trail that eventually leads all the way back to the werewolves. That is a great horrifying thing of your players are just creeping along, they're presumably going through the forest, and then they get up to the hills where it's all nice and snowy, and then they see that. They see there is a literal mouth of a cave right there in front of them, and they can hear howls on the wind. Pretty gnarly stuff. But what actually awaits them there, and what is the full story? Let's start diving into that, shall we? For the intro to Chapter 15, we get incredible amounts of information here. We understand that these werewolves have a huge pack, and they call themselves the Children of Mother Night because they all worship this deity. Recently, a schism has been formed within the pack as a result of a challenge to Kirill's leadership. Who is Kirill? Kirill is the current ruler of this little tribe, and unfortunately his practices are pretty dark. He has it where if you kidnap some kids, you bring them back, you have the kids fight to the death, and then you turn whoever survives. He does this because he doesn't want to turn a bunch of werewolves. He feels like if he does that, then there would be a food problem, and it'd also be a management problem. The person challenging his views here is Emil. Emil wants to take all the kids and transform them all, believing that if you have more werewolves, you are more powerful, and thus you can do whatever you want. So the two are basically having a bit of a problem here. Kirill disappeared and decided to have a lovely conversation with Strahd. After several days, Kirill returned with a pack of direwolves under Strahd's command. And it's at this point, Kirill absolutely established his dominance over the tribe. And more importantly, Emil disappeared. Emil was taken back to Castle Ravenloft to face punishment, and he has not been seen since. Another fantastic reason to show up to Castle Ravenloft early. Because if your players show up to Castle Ravenloft and find themselves in the dungeons, they can find Emil in the dungeons, and there can be a fun relationship built up there where your players meet this man and they either trust him or don't trust him, maybe try and win him over, and of course free him, and potentially have that ramification when your players arrive here. With Emil gone, Kirill reestablished his dominance, but his ideas and tactics did not sit well with the pack's older members, and they certainly didn't please Emil's mate, Zulika. So there's this fun dynamic going on here. We have two people vying for power. They're both evil, and there's a lot of interesting politics going on here. And here in Travel Through the Mist, we get some good information that the werewolves are actually allowed to leave Strahd's domain. However, they are not like the Vistani that can leave and go whenever they choose. Strahd gives them permission to go out, and that is how the werewolves keep up their position. They are able to go out into the world, grab some kids, bring them back here, turn them, and it doesn't affect Barovia too much. But of course, this is one of the tie-ins that your players could have to this whole adventure. Your players could have been hired to be werewolf hunters and got sucked up into the mist, and that is how they have this connection with these werewolves. For approaching the den, we get some really good information that once again this image really helps draw out, but we also get some good information that 100 feet above the cave mouth, further up the sloping mountainside, and not visible from the cave mouth or its vicinity, is a rocky ledge. A character can scale the slope to reach the ledge without the need for climber's kit or ability check. So if you have players that like to investigate around, you should go ahead and tell them, yeah, maybe there is something up there. And maybe your players go ahead and try and find a back entrance to the cave, which they certainly could. The map we get of this place is nothing too special here. It's a pretty standard cave. Something to remember is, of course, that 1 square equals 10 feet. Very big consideration here if you're using maps and all that. So let's go ahead and start diving into each of these locations, shall we? In Area 1, the cave mouth, when your players make their way through here, they'll be able to hear some noise. And when they make their way inside, if they aren't being stealthy, the guards in Area 2 will be able to see the characters. Something important to note is if the characters arrive here with Emil in tow, he can command the werewolves in the den not to attack the characters as they make their way inside. Once again, awesome stuff going to Castle Ravenloft early, getting something from within, and having it affect the outside world. In Area 2, the guard post, there are 2 guards that are named here, Asiana and Dovanka. Basically, if they see anybody, they're going to sound the alarm, and they're going to fight to the death. We're going to be covering how to roleplay up the werewolves in a little bit. I personally think that fighting to the death is always boring. In Area 3, the wolf den, your players will be able to find a ton of wolves located around here, but also interesting enough, there is an ancient werewolf. The dude is super old, and he's only got 36 HP, so he's really not that much of a big deal. But what's very interesting here is we have this guy, just the throwaway character named Skenis, and if he is killed, in his death cries, he will say, "When Kyo returns, he'll skin you alive." So, that's pretty cool, kind of foreshadowing what's going on. Also important to note is for treasure, this guy is packing a ton of awesome stuff. The Electrum loot that he's got is worth 250 GP, and he also carries a pouch containing 450 GP gemstones. This guy is absolutely balling, but he doesn't have anything to spend it on. In Area 4, the underground spring, this is just, a spring, nothing too fancy. Presumably this is where they may bathe or they may just drink water from. And then in Area 4A, we have the crates on the eastern ledge contain heaps of adult-sized clothing. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why this may be. Maybe it's because when werewolves transform, they destroy their clothes. Or maybe they do it to go ahead and blend into different environments. That's what my mentality is. I think they have clothing that is representative of all the places that they can show up to in the actual world, not just in Barovia. They may have Barovian-style clothing, or they may have clothing that looks like it comes from the Sword Coast, or wherever else the mist appear from out in the actual world. In Area 5, we have the deep caves. There's bones strewn all across the floor everywhere, and this means that everywhere you step, you have disadvantage on stealth checks made to move silently. So if you have people that are trying to move silently, they are probably going to have to come up with some creative way to deal with the bones. In Area 5A, we have the South Cave, which contains Bianca, who is a white-haired werewolf in the wolf form, who is Kirill Stoyanovic's mate. In Area 5B, we have the North Cave. This is where Wencencia, a werewolf in wolf form, is taking care of a 10-year-old werewolf in wolf form as well. Kellen, the poor little boy that's been transformed, does have something at least. He's got an eerie little doll that is obviously a Blinsky original. We actually get some information here that Kellen was kidnapped from his homeland in Liam's Hold, a hamlet near the Misty Forest in the Forgotten Realms setting. So you can definitely have this one play close to home wherever your players' characters come from. You can go ahead and say that that kid is from maybe the same village or wherever they come from, and that'll tie them back into the real world of, ooh, yeah, we're not the only ones that are getting sucked up into this land. There's more than just us we have to deal with. In Area 6, we have Kirill's Cave. And what's interesting here is the fact that Kirill has his own cave, but his mate has her own cave. Maybe something's going on there and we just don't know it. Who knows? At the back of Kirill's cave is a curtain made of human skin, behind which is the staircase that leads up to Area 8. In Area 7, we have Shrine of Mother Night, and it's here where your players will be able to find a whole bunch of cages filled with a whole bunch of kids. Pretty unfortunate stuff. Also importantly is they will see a statue at the foot of which is a whole bunch of treasure. We're going to be getting into that treasure being really bad in a moment. Kneeling in front of the statue is a one Zulika, and she's going to go ahead and do what she needs to do. However, the thing is she does need to guard the kids because that's her current orders. But if the players have any news about Emil, then she's going to go ahead and say, hey, how about we work together and get rid of that other guy, shall we? Once again, I'm getting into all that roleplay stuff at the end of all these locations here. But needless to say, Kirill isn't here when your players arrive. Kirill has a 3 in 20 chance of arriving back here whenever your players spend a full hour within the Werewolf Den. So that treasure that's at the foot of the statue, my, is that tempting? 4,500 copper, 900 silver, 250 GP, a whole bunch of gemstones, a whole bunch of jewelries, a whole bunch of this, a whole bunch of that, worth a ton of gold. Unfortunately, anyone who steals from Mother Night is cursed. The werewolves know this and thus don't care about guarding it. Any creature that takes treasure from this pile is haunted by horrible dreams every night, lasting from dusk till dawn. The curse affects only the creature that did the pilfering and isn't passed on to anyone else who might come into possession of the items. Returning a stolen item to the treasure pile doesn't end the curse. This is a tremendous deal because a creature cursed in this way does not gain the benefit of a long rest or short rest during the night. And if your players do not have a greater restoration or remove curse capable, then what this means is that short or long rest time is going to be happening during the day, which is going to eat a lot into their actual adventuring time because presumably people don't want to be going around the lands of Barovia at night. So it doesn't completely kill the character and it doesn't completely kill the adventure. It just means that if you have someone that has this, then they are going to have to spend a lot less time during the day traveling and exploring around because presumably people want to gain the benefit of a short or long rest. However, what's even a bigger deal here is if the fortunes of Ravenloft guide you here, then the item is going to be located right here in this pile, and unfortunately the curse is also applied to the treasure. So yeah, you get that awesome item, but guess what? Whoever picked it up is cursed. Big deal. In Area 8, we have the Ring of Stone. This is where the kids that are captured from all around the realms are brought here and fight to the death. Pretty nasty stuff. A whole bunch of blood-tipped spears located all around here. And we get some pretty gnarly stuff that the last child standing is bitten and turned into a werewolf. Then the bodies of the dead are devoured, their bones picked clean. Pretty gross stuff. So once again, if your players show up into the mouth of the Werewolf Den, navigate here, they can easily find this place, go up the stairs and find it. But what's really cool is if your players explore around a bit, they could theoretically come through here and sneak into the Werewolf Den through the back, which could have a ton of fun roleplay and combat mechanical implications. So let's go ahead and wind it all back here. Your players show up to the Werewolf Den and they're feeling pretty confident. The funny thing is that werewolves are pretty confident too. Whenever a werewolf goes up against another person, they presumably always win, because they're pretty hardy, and most important of all, if someone doesn't have any magical or silver-tipped weaponry, then they're pretty much invincible. So it makes sense that the werewolves would always just get into a fight with anybody because they usually win. But the thing is if your players are showing up to a werewolf den, then they hopefully are confident in their abilities, either because they have enough magical items and they silver-tipped weapons and whatever else. So yes, it makes sense that right in the beginning the werewolves go ahead and fight, but if the werewolves see that your players have more than enough capabilities of fighting them, then they are going to retreat. They're not stupid, right? They have 10 intelligence, they have 11 wisdom. In fact, they are more wise than the average person. So it makes sense that werewolves would go ahead and fight a little bit and then immediately retreat if they're getting blasted by some powerful force. So let's go ahead and say your players show up here and start casting spells left and right and showing off their awesome magical weapons or silver-tipped weapons. What are the werewolves going to do? Well, the werewolves are probably going to go ahead and start deplacing. They're going to start retreating back little by little and trying to gather up all their forces and eventually make their way all the way up here and make sure that they have all the pack ready and, a pretty solid place to defend. If retreating isn't good enough, they're getting blasted and just killed outright, and then the people are going to know. The other werewolves are going to hear all this commotion going on, especially if they're casting big spells or shouting out loudly. The other people are going to hear this. And the werewolves, once again, are not stupid. If the werewolves see that some party has made it through all the way there, then they're going to go ahead and say, hey, you obviously won. Let's go ahead and talk this out. Now, of course, they could be saying this purely out of their own sense of self-preservation, but also because they know that if they wait long enough, then reinforcements are going to show up from behind. Eventually, at some point, Kirill is going to show back up with the hunting party, and maybe by that point, they'll go ahead and hit him from the front and from the back. But most important of all, if your players have no rapport at all with the werewolves at all whatsoever, then things are going to be a little bit tense. But if your players show up here with some rapport with the werewolves, whether they've already encountered them before and fought them, or most important of all, have some of them captured, including, of course, Emil, then that'll be a big deal. Instead of it going straight to combat, then it'll go ahead and be in negotiations, which will be fun. Your players can go ahead and get themselves involved with the situation at hand. What are they going to do? Are they going to try and talk the werewolves down? Are they going to go ahead and support one side over the other? What position are your players going to take here? It's a really tough one. All the werewolves are bad, no matter which ones, right? They're all going out and killing people, eating people, capturing kids, making kids werewolves. That's pretty gnarly stuff. So if you have a super good aligned group, then yeah, they're probably just going to go ahead and try and kill them all. But if your players step in here, they might find themselves way in over their heads and outnumbered and outmatched. So let's go ahead and dive into the special events here that detail a little bit about them. The first special event we have here is Leader of the Pack. Once again, every hour the characters are inside the werewolf den, roll a d20. On a roll of 18 or higher, the werewolves return. And of course, they're going to be dragging some game that they captured. But when they discover that the adventurers have come through here, they're going to go ahead and go on the offensive. What's also really neat here is we also get some cool battle tactic here. Kirill sends 3 of the werewolves up top to go ahead and flank from behind, which is pretty smart. If Emil is present when Kirill returns, Emil is determined to kill his rival and become the new pack leader. If he succeeds, he allows the characters to leave the den, but refuses to release the kidnapped children unless Zuleka is present to convince him otherwise, because she fears that the characters might kill her husband if he doesn't let the children go. Pretty smart. If both Kirill and Emil die, Zuleka becomes the pack leader and cuts all ties to Strahd. The ordinary wolves leave the pack at once. If the characters were drawn into Barovia by the werewolves, the attacks on the Sword Coast now come to an end. If she also died, a young but fierce werewolf named Franz Groza becomes the pack leader. He is vicious and treacherous, showing the characters no mercy. So once again, this plays into the rapport and dynamics you have built up with these werewolves. Are your players going to go ahead and show up here and pick sides? Or are they going to go ahead and stand off? What are they going to do? So it states here that Emil and Kirill are probably going to fight to the death. The funny thing about this, though, is that mechanically, it actually wouldn't be allowed to work. So mechanically, a werewolf can only take bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage from non-magical attacks not made with silver weapons. But the funny thing is werewolves don't have any sort of that, right? They don't have magical attacks, and they're probably not silvering up their fangs and claws. But of course, you can go ahead and let that slide. Just go ahead and say that they can fight each other because that just makes sense, right? So the outcome here is going to really help change the situation at hand. If your player saved Emil and kept Zuleka alive, then the werewolves are no longer going to be an issue in this campaign. If your players dealt with Emil and Zuleka, then of course, you know, the werewolves are going to reign supreme and they're just going to do whatever the heck they want. Especially if they once again also kill Kirill and there's no leadership from any of these rabble, then Franz Groza becomes the pack leader. He is vicious and treacherous, showing the characters no mercy. If the werewolves can see the destruction that the players ring down on them, whether they're casting major fireballs or attacking multiple times in a turn with crazy weapons, doing a whole bunch of this and that, and are able to smite werewolves down no problem, then the werewolves hopefully are smart enough to not get into this issue. But if you do have the werewolves go ahead and fight them to the last, then that could also be a good resolution as well. Your players deal with all the werewolves die, no more werewolves. And maybe, yeah, there's a few werewolves floating around the land of Barovia, but at least it's no longer a major pack, and that's the important thing. This one is really going to test your players' morality here on, are they willing to accept a lesser evil, or are they going to go all the way and try and deal with them? Are they strong enough to do that? That really depends on the level that they arrive here. If they are a lower level, like let's say level 5, just barely hitting 5, then this may be too much for them. They may get overwhelmed by the numbers. But if they are level 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10, then yeah, this might just be a breeze because they have enough resources to deal with it. The second special event we have here is Die Kinder. If your players arrive here and free all the werewolves, then get them the heck out of there, they've got a whole bunch of kids on their hands. What do? Well, if they killed Kirill, then really not much of an issue. If they didn't kill Kirill, then Kirill's going to say, hey, we want those kids back, and going to go ahead and reassemble a hunting party. If your characters are debating for a while about what to do with these kids, then a wereraven's going to show up and say, hey, you should go ahead and drop them off at Kresk. This is once again another great way to introduce a concept to the game if your players haven't already met the wereravens in the lands of Barovia. Especially if you follow the text here and have it where the wereraven goes ahead and helps out the party, and then after making its way to Kresk, immediately heads south, clearly in the direction of the Wizard of Wine's winery. Your players might catch on to something there. The children are understandably traumatized by their imprisonment because they probably heard some nasty things and they also saw some nasty things. So then remember is those kids are cooked up in a little den where there is 2 carcasses that are laying out against the wall and there's maggots writhing out of them. Pretty gnarly. Characters are going to need a DC 15 charisma check, whether that be intimidation, persuasion, or deception, to try and calm them down, or they can go ahead and use some magic. And they can go ahead and get them to be quiet for a bit until they get them to a location. If your players take them to the Kresk, then they can just go ahead and have the kids spread out across the village. If they bring them to the village of Vlaki, then the Mardikovs can allow the children to stay at the Blue Water Inn until the characters return to collect them. Something important to note is one of the biggest things that a lot of people add to the village of Vlaki is an orphanage, because that would make sense that a large town would have an orphanage specifically because of these lands, right? So maybe go ahead and just have the kids be dropped off at the orphanage where you can have a ton of fun with that. But something I wanted to consider here is not all those kids are no longer just human kids anymore. Something to remember is one of the kids that's located around here is in fact a werewolf now. So maybe you go ahead and entertain the idea that one or maybe even more of these kids have already been turned. And when they get taken to any one of these villages, then perhaps that werewolf side of them starts creeping up over time. You can have a ton of fun with that. And once again, that presses into more of the morality of the issue. What do your players do with a werewolf kid? You know, are they going to go ahead and take him out? Are they going to go ahead and bring him back to the tribe? What are they going to do? Those are the tough questions, and once again, it entirely depends on the kind of group that you have, but that may be something you're totally on board for, but that may be something that you should easily avoid. And just like that, we're done with the Werewolf Den. Once again, this is another one of those chapters which you could go ahead and rip out of the book, and it doesn't really affect too much, but if you add it to the campaign, it can certainly add quite a lot. I certainly love it, and I love the interactions, the political intrigue that your players can have, and the morality choices that your players may make when they arrive here. Are they going to be able to contend with it all? Are they going to have to decide a lesser of evils? Are they going to go ahead and strike up deals and bargains? Are you going to have that scumbag player that says, hey, let me be infected by a werewolf so I can get more powerful? Who knows? I certainly think that the werewolves add quite a lot of fun to this campaign, and of course, having Emil locked away in Castle Ravenloft is just another fantastic reason to send your players to Castle Ravenloft early, because if they get themselves captured in Castle Ravenloft, then they can become friends with Emil, and maybe Emil is using the party, but maybe Emil does get turned by the party, and maybe the players go ahead and have him become a good guy in the end. So go ahead and tell me, do you plan on introducing the Werewolf Den into your campaign? And if so, how are you going to get them there? And what are they going to be finding once they arrive? Are they going to be finding, just a big old brawl? Or are they going to be finding some political discourse that they may stumble into? Are your players going to find Emil in the Castle Ravenloft? Or maybe you say go ahead and screw that and have Emil show up somewhere else in the campaign. Maybe he's just found wandering the wilderness after just getting beaten up. Maybe he's in the village of Loki or in the village of Kresk. You can go ahead and move these named NPCs anywhere to go ahead and fit the story that you desire. Go ahead and tell me all these things because I want to know. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to all my amazing patrons up here. You guys are absolutely awesome. Thank you so very much. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.